Hey, and welcome to this year's NFL Halloween slate. This is, of course, the NFL Week 8 DFS slate playbook video here at No Huddle Fantasy Sports, where we're going to be breaking down the core plays, the best plays, players that you should be building your lineups around this upcoming Sunday in NFL DFS. So, if you're here for some DFS, you've come to the right spot. We'll be breaking down all the information you need to build winning lineups this upcoming Sunday. Sit back, relax, and let's talk some NFL DFS. Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back to the channel here. And of course, happy Halloween if you're watching this video Saturday or Sunday, whatever day you're watching the video. This Sunday's upcoming slate is, of course, occurring on Halloween, so pretty cool here. But as always, thank you guys for tuning in here to the channel. Thanks for finding your way to this particular video. Hopefully you find these videos helpful. If you do, please make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Give these videos a like. Easiest way to help support smaller channels like this. But we are talking about a Halloween slate here for Week 8. We have 12 total games on this slate, which is a little refreshing considering we've had some smaller slates overall, including a 10-game slate last week. So adding 4 more teams, 2 more games to this slate is a little refreshing here. But as you can see here in terms of a slate outlook, we're talking QB ownership being a little concentrated this week. Even though we have more games, more teams on the schedule, we are talking about several guys, including Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes, Prescott, Rodgers, Kyler Murray, guys like that that simply aren't on this slate, either because they're playing in a primetime game they've already played, or they're on a bye week. So that's going to result in some ownership concentration, especially at the quarterback position. But nonetheless, we'll look at it, we'll talk about certain players, and we'll talk about that ownership. There are also some junk spots. Again, it's refreshing that we have some more games on this slate, but in terms of those games that are available, in terms of some of the teams that are available, there are some junk spots. I'll just leave it at that. We have 6 teams, and we'll talk about this here in a second when we look at Vegas totals, but 6 teams with less than 20 implied team points. So that's really the cutoff for me in terms of highlighting teams that have really projections that are really, really low in terms of scoring. Anything under 20 is really bad, and we have 6 of them on this particular slate. So we'll talk about all that here in a second. But in addition to that, there are some heavy chalk spots. I talked about quarterbacks already. You're going to see it in some of the ownership projections for running backs, for even wide receivers. But in general, we're going to try to avoid those heavy chalk spots where possible. These videos always are dedicated more towards the GPP tournament, large tournament style of play. But I will talk about it at times, when there is chalk, when we're going to avoid it, and maybe when you want to eat that chalk in a GPP. So all of that will be discussed here as we break down the plays. And I will mention, because I think it's fun to mention tight ends, because we don't focus on them very heavily in our lineups in these videos in terms of dedicating a lot of money towards them. At times I will pay up for the top of the top, right? That's your Kelce's, your Wallers, players like that. But most of the time I'm looking for value. I'm looking for some darts at the bottom of the salary range. But on this particular week, Week 8, there's a ton of options within the same couple of $1,000 range here. And again, it's because players like Kelce, Waller, Kittle, Andrews are all unavailable due to bye weeks or playing on primetime scheduled games. So all of that will be discussed here shortly. Just some quick outlook for this upcoming Week 8 slate to consider as we start to build our lineups. Now, talking Vegas totals in general, some of the teams here, I already said it, there's 6 teams below 20 here in terms of an implied team total. That's really, really low. Some of these are embarrassingly low, just above 2 touchdowns being projected for a couple of the teams here. But I highlight anything below 21-22 as red, meaning I'm not saying you can't play players from these or pick and choose certain plays that are in good spots in these games or on these teams. But in general, anything below that 21-22 mark is, from a Vegas perspective, a pretty poor total. So you have the New York Jets, Houston, Pittsburgh, San Francisco, Chicago, Miami, Jacksonville, and Washington. And then the San Francisco-Chicago game, you could just kind of lump into that as a whole, all projected below that 21-22 point threshold. As I mentioned, San Francisco and Chicago together are both below that number, and their total overall is sitting at 40, which is really low for an NFL game. So again, not that you can't pick players from these particular teams, but just something to consider. Vegas is not projecting a lot of points to be scored by these teams. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, you have the Rams at 30 plus, Buffalo at 31 plus, and then Tampa Bay at 27.5. I've highlighted all of those in green. Anything above 27, 27.5 is something I like to highlight just as a team that's projected a good fair amount of points. And then of course anything above 30 is a really good number there. So 3 teams that stand out there. Will we choose players from those teams? We'll see. We'll break it down here soon. The only other thing I want to mention here in terms of an over-under, a little bit of an unusual week, even though we have some teams with high totals. You only have one game above 50, and that's Tennessee at Indianapolis. Usually we see 2 or 3 games above 50. Now you have several games like Philly, Detroit at 48, 48.5 for that Tampa game, 49.5 for New England at the Chargers. So there's some healthy totals for sure on these games, but only one that stands out above 50, and that's Tennessee at Indianapolis. As always, these things can change. I'm recording this video early. I've actually made this video Friday night, but it's probably coming to you guys early on Saturday. So things can change, injuries will come out, things will happen, and the lines will move. But in general, this is what we're looking at for Vegas on this particular slate. Something you guys might want to focus on as you start to build out your lineups. So getting to the meat and potatoes of this video, we're going to always start with quarterbacks here. 2 guys I want to mention, Jalen Hurts and Trevor Lawrence. Kind of different reasons here, but I want to start before I even break down these guys with Josh Allen. He's not on the screen for you guys right now, but he is definitely in play this week. In fact, he's definitely going to be one of the 3 or 4 quarterbacks I build my 150 lineups around. I just don't have him on this particular, slide here showing you guys because he's not probably going to be my 1 or 2 on this particular slate, and that's mostly driven by ownership. There's going to be a lot of ownership going Josh Allen's way this Sunday for good reason. He's in a great spot, but I just want to mention to you guys, and I will talk about him briefly at the end of the video and other highlights. I'm not forgetting Josh Allen. I'm not telling you guys not to play Josh Allen. He is definitely in play this week, but in terms of me trying to get some leverage here and trying to take advantage of his ownership, hopefully, I'm focusing on these 2 guys, and I'll start with Jalen Hurts. Obviously, Jalen Hurts is having a weird season, I would say. From a fantasy perspective, he's great. From a reality perspective, he has not, and the Eagles have not performed very well this season. But we're here for daily fantasy football. We're here for fantasy points, and Jalen Hurts definitely meets that for us this week, and he meets it basically every single week, every 4th quarter. He finds a way to kind of blow off his, his projections and really succeed in terms of fantasy projections in fantasy points. So for Jalen Hurts this week, you're looking at $7,200 on DraftKings, $84 on FanDuel. His price does continue to climb a little bit each week because he's performing well. But it's all about the matchup here. He is on the road here playing in Detroit. 48 over-under, so a healthy over-under on this game. Philadelphia is a favorite on the road, but not too big here at -3.5. And they do have a pretty good implied team total at 25.8. You guys, I mentioned Daily Fantasy Nerd. I actually showed it off in the last video for week 7. You guys need to check it out. It's down, linked in the description. But in terms of their projections for this week, 24.3 on DraftKings, 23.1. Those will change a little bit as we get closer to lock. But generally, those are the projections you're looking for Jalen Hurts this week, at least from Daily Fantasy Nerd's perspective. Now, why are we looking at Jalen Hurts? Well, number 1, Philadelphia completely lacks a running game this season. Miles Sanders was being criminally underused, and then he, of course, got hurt a week or 2 ago when they did finally start to use him. So they're now missing Miles Sanders, and they're just not known this season for really relying on the run in any capacity. Whether or not that's right or wrong, they just simply aren't. In terms of Jalen Hurts, though, he is adding a lot in terms of a floor on the ground this season. He's running the ball on an average, at least in the last 3 games, and I do like to focus more so on the last 3 than anything. He's averaging 10 plus rushing attempts per game. Really healthy number there. Gives you a really good floor for quarterbacks. We always in these videos talk at least about 1, if not 2 quarterbacks that give you that floor from a rushing perspective. He has 11 red zone rushing attempts in addition to that in his last 3 games. So in addition to actually running the ball, right, he's actually getting valuable opportunities running the ball in the red zone. So we want to take advantage of that for sure from a fantasy perspective. This game in general too, in Detroit, is projected as the fastest paced game on the slate. They're playing indoors. It's going to be, no particular weather issues. Detroit plays fast. Philadelphia plays fast. I'm liking it from that perspective. Fast pace means more opportunity for scoring, more opportunity for fantasy point production. The offense-defensive line pass block advantage is in his favor at plus 16%, so we shouldn't see too much of pressure there. In addition to that, the numbers back it up. Detroit is ranked 23rd overall in their pass rush. The numbers you really want to look at, though, they're 32nd, dead last in football in coverage, and that is backed up by 25th overall in terms of DVOA versus the pass. The final thing I'll mention here, they're giving up the 22nd most passing yards per game. I'm sorry, they're ranked 22nd, meaning they're giving up a lot of passing yards per game, and they're giving up, they're ranked 23rd in terms of fantasy points per game to the quarterback position. So giving up a lot of yards, giving up a lot of points to quarterbacks. Their coverage is bad. They're just a bad defense this year. It's an excellent spot. I just read before I started recording this, it is the best spot for wide receivers this week versus this Detroit secondary that's just absolutely bad this season. So Jalen Hurts obviously checks out here on the road. He's my favorite quarterback. He's a guy I'll be definitely building lineups around. He's a core play for sure. Now, to get a little crazy here, and this is definitely a lower owned play, I'm looking at Trevor Lawrence. Be perfectly honest with you guys, I'm not a big Trevor Lawrence fan. I have not played him yet this season, and coming into this season, I thought he was a bit overhyped. I hate the whole generational quarterback talk, blah, 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 blah. Regardless, I just am not that high on him as most people, but we're talking about fantasy here, and I think this is a spot for him to really turn it up and have a great performance at a low price, and that's the kind of the key here in playing Trevor Lawrence. He's $5,500 on DraftKings, really low price tag there, $67 on FanDuel, so definitely saving you some money on both sites. Playing on the road in Seattle, 44 over/under in that game. Jacksonville is a underdog at plus 3.5. And the thing that's scary here, and I completely understand, this is a risky play. Jacksonville is one of those 6 teams below 20 implied team total at 19.8. So not a lot of points being projected for Jacksonville, but I do like them to break through that. I do like them to score this week, and I do like Trevor Lawrence, of course. Daily Fantasy Nerd projects him at 18.6 DraftKings points, 17.6 on FanDuel. Again, this is a low salary and low ownership play. Trying to get some leverage on the field, also allowing you to pay up at other positions, but nonetheless, Trevor Lawrence is still in a good spot. His salary has actually dropped. They are coming off a bye week, which I really like. That's another reason I'm going in favor of Trevor Lawrence here. More time to prepare. But coming off a bye week, they played in London the week before. His salary has actually dipped, even though he's had several good performances in a row. In fact, I think his performance in Week 6 in London was arguably his best performance to date. Broke 300 yards for the first time this season. He's only had a touchdown passing, I think, one in every game this season, or in every game he's actually scored. So we'd like to see that number get to 2 or 3, right? Of course. But nonetheless, still really good signs here pointing up in terms of the arrow for Trevor Lawrence. He does offer a rushing floor. Now, it's not Jalen Hurts, but he does run the ball on average about 4+ times a game. So that gives you a little bit of a floor there that we can take advantage of. And then in terms of the defense, this is the main reason I'm focusing on him. A, the price tag is really low, but B, it's a good matchup. Seattle is 21st overall in terms of their pass rush, 26th in coverage, 25th in DVOA for the pass. So really basically bottom 10, bottom 5 team against the pass, really. In Seattle, the final thing I'll mention here, ranked 27th in terms of passing yards per game and 25th in terms of fantasy points per game given up to quarterbacks. So kind of a risky play, right? Trevor Lawrence is not for the faint of heart. He's a GPP, of course, only play, but I do like Jalen Hurts this week. I do like Trevor Lawrence. Those will definitely be 2 of my top 2 quarterbacks that I'll be building lineups around as we enter this Halloween slate. Now, in terms of running backs, 2 guys here that I really like this week. Darrell Henderson, who's going to be a little bit higher owned, and also DeAndre Swift, who I expect to get some ownership here. But both of these guys, I wouldn't say are top tier price salary guys, but they're definitely guys that are expensive. And Jalen Hurts and Trevor Lawrence do help you fit these guys in. But let's start here with Darrell Henderson. He is $6,500 on DraftKings, $77 on FanDuel, playing on the road here. Sorry, it says he's playing at home, but he is actually on the road here in Houston with a 46.5 over/under. The big thing here, you don't typically take road running backs, especially guys like Darrell Henderson that tote the rock a lot on the ground, but they are huge favorites. The Rams are minus 15.5 point favorites in Houston with a 30.8 implied team total. Daily Fantasy Nerd projects him at 18.9 DraftKings points, 16.4 FanDuel. I think it's a really good spot. I think it's a safe play here. Yes, they are on the road, but again, you're talking 15.5-point favorites. They're going to run the ball a lot. They're going to be up a lot in this game. In addition to that, they're projected over 30 points. So if they're going to score that many points, you got to believe Darrell Henderson has a real shot at scoring a touchdown. If you're a FanDuel guy, you want those touchdowns, and I think Darrell Henderson is definitely in that spot this week. Now, Week 7 was a little bit of a dud. Hopefully that lowers his ownership because he was heavily owned in Week 7, but his salary has dropped as a result of that, so we want to take advantage of that. He's playing great snaps, right? 79% of the snaps over the last 3 games. Over the last 3 games, he's also getting a ridiculous amount of opportunities per game, averaging well over 21, and opportunities are defined as the rushing attempts plus the targets. I'm not talking about just catches. I'm talking about the actual opportunity to be a part of, a fantasy point play, and that's actually targets. So 21 plus opportunities per game on average over the last 3. In addition to that, I broke it down a little bit here. Over the last 3 games, he's had 8 red zone rushing attempts and 11 red zone targets. So think about that. He's getting 3 or 4 red zone opportunities per game over the last 3 games. We want to take advantage of that, especially against Houston, who's just really, really bad. And the Rams, again, are just huge favorites projected to score a lot of points. Massive, the biggest, by the way, rush advantage here. O-line, D-line rush advantage sits at 66% in the positive. 1.51 yards before contact. That's the second best on this slate, meaning he's going 1.5 yards before anyone even touches him on average. Houston's defense, again, really bad situation here for that defense versus the Rams. They are ranked 27th in terms of rush defense. In terms of DVOA versus the rush, they are 30th. So bottom 5 team in both categories. And then bottom basically 2 in terms of rushing yards per game and yards per carry given up to running backs, 31st in both categories. So Darrell Henderson will be a little chalky here, but I'm going right back to the well here. Even though he's on the road here, I like Darrell Henderson. He'll be a core play running back of mine during Week 8. I also like DeAndre Swift. A little bit of a different situation here because Detroit is not very good, right? But he's still getting a crazy amount of opportunity, especially coming out of the backfield in the passing game because Detroit is often losing games. He's a great comeback player against that Jalen Hurts stack. I'll mention that when we talk stacks, but in general, I do like DeAndre Swift on this slate, regardless if it's a comeback play against Jalen Hurts. $7,100 on DraftKings, $79 on FanDuel. So his price is up a little bit, especially compared to someone like Darrell Henderson, but we're going to go right back to it this week. He's playing at home versus Philadelphia, 48 over-under. Everything I mentioned with Hurts applies here, just in the inverse, right? Detroit is a 3.5-point home underdog with a 22.3 implied team total. He is projected 19.7 DraftKings points, 16.5 on FanDuel. I'm pretty sure if you guys check out Daily Fantasy Nerd, he's either the 2nd or 3rd highest projected running back on this slate. So something to consider there. Again, check out Daily Fantasy Nerd. It's linked in the description if you haven't already. Great optimizer, great tool to figure all these things out. He leads the NFL. That's DeAndre Swift here leads the NFL with 52 targets for running backs. That's crazy. If you think about Najee Harris, Alvin Kamara, players like that they're behind him. He's getting a crazy amount of targets out of the backfield. So if you're playing DraftKings, that's extremely valuable, especially when you know Detroit is likely going to be trailing, at least at some point during this game. It's an indoor game. It's a good opportunity for scoring. I mentioned it's a high-pace game, so plenty of opportunity here. Now, he's playing 76% of the snaps on average over his last 3 games. Really healthy number. 3/4 of the snaps are staying with Swift here. He's getting 20+ opportunities per game on average over his last 3. Again, a majority of those are coming via the targets and coming out of the backfield in the passing game, but he's still getting about 13-15 rushing attempts too. He has 6 red zone rushing attempts, 5 red zone targets over his last 3 games. Another guy just like Darrell Henderson with 11 total red zone opportunities. Very valuable opportunities over his last 3 games. Now there is an O-line, D-line rush advantage here in favor of Detroit at plus 33%, so we like to see that. And then in terms of the defense, it's a great matchup. Philadelphia's rush defense is ranked 29th by Pro Football Focus, and then the DVOA for their rushing defense is 29th also. So those match up, meaning not a very good defense, bottom 3 team versus the rush. They are 29th in terms of rushing yards per game and 23rd overall in terms of yards per carry. So again, not much better there. in terms of the things that they're able to stop or I guess allow on defense. The other thing I want to mention here, because it's important with Swift, is the amount of targets that Philadelphia allows. They allow the 5th most amount of targets out of the backfield to running backs in the NFL. So that plays right into Swift's kind of weaponry here, arsenal that he brings to the table, and we're going to take advantage of that for sure this week as a core play. Jumping over to the wide receivers here, I thought a lot about this, and in my opinion, this is a great slate for wide receivers. There are a ton of guys that are definitely viable options this week. I couldn't fit them all here. I had to choose 2 guys. It was pretty difficult. I'll talk about some more highlights at the end, but these are 2 guys I'm definitely seeing in a lot of my lineups this week. They seem to be core players that I am building around, and that's Chris Godwin and A.J. Brown. Both of these guys are in that salary range about, if you're talking DraftKings, right, $6,000 to $7,000. I think it's a loaded salary range this week. Again, that's why I like so many receivers, but these guys do stand out to me. So for Godwin here, 64 on DraftKings, 72 on FanDuel, playing on the road in New Orleans with a 49.5 over-under. Really healthy scoring environment there. Tampa Bay is of course a favorite, being that they are Tampa Bay at -4.5, so a closer game than I think I expected to see in terms of a spread when they came out here, but nonetheless something we'll take advantage of. 27.5 implied team total there. So again, the scoring environment for Tampa Bay for this game is excellent, and we're trying to get our exposure here with Chris. Daily Fantasy Nerd projects him at 18.1 DraftKings points, 14.1 on FanDuel. The big thing here, though, is Antonio Brown is out. Now, I think the last thing I heard is Antonio Brown could be out for several weeks, but regardless, he is definitely out for Week 8 here, and that equals good things for Chris Godwin. Tampa Bay is a huge pass-heavy volume team. We've seen it every game you've watched them, right? Even in the goal line situations, Tom Brady is just pulling it back and throwing 4 or 5 touchdowns. So the numbers are what they are, right? 65% pass run ratio here. Heavy volume for any wide receiver, basically anyone involved in the passing game there. It's a great place to be a part of. Chris Godwin here is averaging 9+ targets per game over his last 3. And I did double check that. The games where Antonio Brown has not played, it's basically the same. So there's not much of a bump without Antonio Brown. I just think it's more valuable and just gives you more of an opportunity with Antonio Brown out, because those targets, of course, have to go somewhere. Believe it or not, Chris Godwin leads this slate with 15 red zone targets. That's tied with Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp does have 15, but he is tied with Chris Godwin here. And the thing is, everybody thinks Mike Evans gets all of the red zone work. He gets a ton, and he got, I think, 6 red zone targets in Week 7, had 3 touchdowns. But believe it or not, Chris here leads that team, leads the NFL on this particular slate with 15 here. So that's something to consider here. He does get a lot of valuable targets in the red zone. 45% of the team's red zone targets are going his way. Just another number to back that up. And then in terms of the matchup here, it's good, right? It's 75.5 according to Pro Football Focus. That's the wide receiver cornerback matchup. And the New Orleans defense is 29th overall in terms of fantasy points per game given up to the wide receiver position. So all good numbers here. I do really like Chris Godwin. I think he'll be a lower owned player considering what I'm hearing out there. And again, that's one of the reasons he is one of my core plays here. I do really like A.J. Brown too, and A.J. Brown's coming off what I think was a really good game, a really good indicator that A.J. Brown that we expected is starting to show up. But in terms of the numbers here, $6,900 on DraftKings, $76 on FanDuel, playing on the road in Indianapolis, really healthy. Again, another healthy environment of scoring here at 50.5 for an over-under. Tennessee is an underdog on the road at +3 with a 24.8 implied team total. DFN projects him at 18.6 DraftKings points and 14.8 over on FanDuel. I mentioned he's finally healthy here, so he dealt with some early injuries at the early part of the season, including a hamstring. He's coming off what I think is an elite performance in Week 6, and if you keep in mind, he was sick during that game. He had food poisoning, I think Chipotle food poisoning going into that game. Looked a little rough in the first, even second quarter, but really turned it on in the second half, and he looked like the A.J. Brown that everybody expected coming into the season. Big-bodied, fast, elite, just unmatched type of player in this league at the wide receiver position. Now, his numbers are still good regardless of what has happened in the early part of the season. He has 33% of the team's target share since his return, so I think that's the last 3 weeks. But as I mentioned, for the season, 39% of the team air yards. So not only does he have a third of the team's targets right now, but he's also getting valuable down the field targets. That's what we want to focus on for wide receivers. It's an excellent matchup here in terms of wide receiver cornerback at 88.6. And then the coverage and the defenses just don't exist here. So everybody thought Indianapolis had a great defense coming into this season, and they may still. It may pan out that way. We may be wrong on A.J. Brown this week. They may shut him down. But in general, the numbers right now, Indianapolis defense ranked 23rd in coverage, 22nd in passing DVOA, and then 24th in terms of fantasy points given up to wide receivers on average per game. So A.J. Brown, another core play of mine. Really like what I saw last week. I'm going right back to the well here with A.J. Brown as a core play wide receiver. I mentioned early in this video that I think it's a good week for tight ends, and that's because some of the harder decision tight ends at the very top of the spectrum in salary are off the slate. That leaves a lot of guys in kind of the $2,000, $3,000, $4,000 I guess cushion of salary here, and that's where we're going this week. And the two guys I want to mention are Dallas Goedert and Kyle Pitts. Now Dallas is my favorite here, and he beats out Pitts just slightly because of the savings. We got to save some money somewhere, especially if we're going to pay up a little bit for your Jalen Hurts or Josh Allen's. Now, of course, as I mentioned, if you're going with Trevor Lawrence, you can certainly basically afford players the rest of the way through your build. But in terms of Dallas Goedert, he does save you some money here. 47 on DraftKings, 5,900 on FanDuel, playing on the road in Detroit. Basically everything I mentioned with Jalen Hurts, and we're going here with Dallas. He had a disappointing week 6 in terms of target share, but he did still perform well. He caught a 2-point conversion. He still had 70 yards on limited targets. And it's disappointing because Zach Ertz is gone, right? They traded Zach Ertz to Arizona, and Zach Ertz and him really ate into each other. It's been basically 2 or 3 years that we've just wished that Zach Ertz got out of Philadelphia so that Dallas here could, start to eat. And that's what we had last week. And again, that led to a little bit of a disappointment in the fact that he only got, I think, 5 or 6 total targets. So that's coming. Just don't worry about what happened last week. It's coming here. I think that should say actually week 7. Regardless, it's coming here in week 8 or in future weeks, right? His opportunities are going to go up. Everything that Zach Ertz left behind should funnel his way at least partially, and that should equal just a great spot. I think this is the lowest you're going to see Dallas Goedert in terms of salary this season. It's only going to go up from here. These price tags are too low. But as I mentioned, Zach Ertz leaves behind 15% of the targets and 22% of the red zone targets. Again, I don't expect all of that to go to Dallas here, but if 5, even 10% of those targets, both in the red zone and generally, go his way, that's a great boost from a fantasy perspective. Some good numbers here, though, indicate that he stands out as a tight end generally, right? 9.93 ADOT, average depth of target, meaning he doesn't catch just junk. He's actually downfield, making plays. That's why he had 70 yards in week 7, even though he had only a couple of catches and a couple of targets. That's 7th among qualified tight ends. Qualified tight ends. He has 39% of the team's red zone target share right now. That's on the season. So again, Zach Ertz had 22% of that, meaning in the red zone, Jalen Hurts in Philadelphia targets their tight ends over 50% of the time. Actually, it's nearly 60% of the time. So again, I don't think 60% of those targets in the red zone will go Dallas's way, but if he can get that number into the 40s and 50%, that's payday, man, and that's what we're going to take advantage of as soon as we can here. And also, finally, it's a 33% pro football focused tight end matchup advantage here for Dallas. So I really like him. I like the price tag on him. Again, I think it's the lowest you're going to see all season, so let's take advantage of that this week. In addition to that, I like Kyle Pitts. Now, the price is higher on Kyle Pitts, but he is Kyle Pitts, right? He's starting to turn into the freak, the player that everybody envisioned him to be. Whether or not Atlanta had taken the right pick here in Kyle Pitts, he's still a phenomenal talent. He's still a phenomenal fantasy point tight end that is starting to turn into form. So he's 63 on DraftKings, 68 on FanDuel. He's playing at home versus Carolina. A little bit of a tougher defense too. That's how Dallas won out here, but a little bit of a tougher defense in Carolina. 46.5 is the over-under. Atlanta is a favorite at -3 with a 24.5 implied team total. Again, he's an elite talent. We've seen it over the last couple of weeks, just making ridiculous down the field Julio Jones types of plays at the tight end position, making catches down the sideline. Just a really, really good talent and starting to show here. It has taken several weeks. He wasn't that player early on, but we now have 2, 3, 4 games in a row where he's really, really turning it up. Reasonable salary, not the best, but definitely reasonable, all things considered. He runs a route on 96% of the pass plays this season. That's 4th overall in the NFL. So this guy has basically no business blocking for Atlanta. He's just out there making plays. 23% of the team's red zone targets do go his way. That's this season. Hopefully that number continues to increase. But the big thing here, I mentioned it with Ertz, Kyle Pitts has an 11.3 ADOT. That leads all qualified tight ends on this, I guess in the NFL, not even on the slate, but I believe that's also either top 10, if not top 5 in terms of qualified receivers. So this dude is making plays down the field like a receiver. They're not just junk 2, 3, 5 yard pass plays that a lot of tight ends see. This guy's actually stretching the field and making plays, and we want to take advantage of that. He's 7th among tight ends in total targets this season, but I challenge you to look over the last 3 games. I talk about that a lot here. He has 27 targets and 5 red zone targets over the last 3. His target share is 21% over the last 3, and it's a great matchup here at plus 45% in terms of Pro Football Focus's tight end matchup. So really starting to turn it on. That's the key here with Kyle Pitts. I will be playing a lot of Kyle Pitts, and I'll be playing a lot of Dallas Goedert in my lineups this week for the Week 8 slate. So we always like to break down quickly the stacks. Both guys I mentioned are Jalen Hurts and Trevor Lawrence. Jalen Hurts, you want to go with Devontae Smith. Devontae Smith is in a great matchup this week. Pray to God that Jalen Hurts and Sirianni find a way to get him the ball. But nonetheless, he's the guy you want to play for sure with your Jalen Hurts stacks. If you want to go with 2, or you want to go off Smith for some reason, I mentioned him just there. Dallas Goedert is the play for sure. I like both of those guys stacked with Hurts. I think it's a great spot for both of these guys to get their targets up in Detroit, in an indoor game. Everything I mentioned, I'm not going to repeat it here, but just a great spot. Now, I mentioned already DeAndre Swift. You want to come back with a player typically against these stacks, especially when you stack 2 players with a quarterback. You want to try to take advantage of a high-scoring game environment. DeAndre Swift is by far the clearest running back to play at home versus that Jalen Hurts stack. In fact, the Hurts, Smith, Goddard, Swift is my favorite 4-piece combination for this slate. But another guy you could consider is TJ Hawkinson. There's really no wide receivers on that Detroit team, especially from Jared Goff's perspective. He's just horrible. But he throws short, and TJ Hawkinson is a guy that takes advantage of a lot of that. In addition to that, we have Trevor Lawrence here. The number 1 guy with Trevor Lawrence is definitely Marvin Jones Jr. He's a value almost every single week. He's had a great season. It's a little up and down. It's Trevor Lawrence, it's Jacksonville. But all things considered, Marvin Jones is probably the receiver you want to take. DJ Chark is now out for the season. I believe they put him on IR. So that opens up other opportunities for Marvin Jones. In addition to that, maybe somebody like Laviska Shenault could be in play. I don't know how crazy I'll get with it, but those 2 guys are the guys I am considering to go with Trevor Lawrence. Coming back, though, with Seattle, the tough thing is Geno Smith has been really bad, especially with Tyler Lockett. DK Metcalf broke a big touchdown last week, but outside of that, really has done nothing. But those are the 2 guys, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. Take your pick. Hope to God that Geno Smith can start to turn something around, especially against Jacksonville. But those are the guys you want to target to come back against that Trevor Lawrence stack. So that wraps up the core plays there. I mentioned already a lot of these guys. Josh Allen, I did not tell you to avoid him, right? I'm telling you to play Josh Allen. He is a great play this week, especially in cash games. But in terms of my builds, I'm seeing the other 2 guys I mentioned more right now for various reasons that I mentioned. But Josh Allen for sure in play this week. Traveling to Miami, they are a huge favorite, but you got to expect if they score a lot of points which is what they're projected to do, most of those points are going to come somehow, some way through Josh Allen. Matt Stafford's in play this week. Tom Brady's in play this week. Those are the quarterbacks I'll round out with there. In terms of running backs that I'm also considering, I am paying up if possible. I like Kamara. I like Najee Harris. I like Jonathan Taylor. I like James Robinson. Those are the 4 guys that round out my, 6 running backs. I particularly like Jonathan Taylor. He almost made a core play piece there, but just didn't, right? Jonathan Taylor, though, definitely a guy I want to point out to you guys that's in play this week in a great opportunity. Cooper Kupp is in play every single week. You don't need much of an explanation. Stephon Diggs is a guy you're going to pair with Josh Allen, but generally is a good spot if you want to one-off somebody from that Buffalo game. Michael Pittman Jr. is His targets aren't great, but he's getting some really good, valuable, deep targets. He has a good connection with Carson Wentz right now. He's a value play, Michael Pittman Jr. I also like Deebo Samuel for San Francisco. That's a dude that's a little underrated, getting a ridiculous amount of targets each and every week. I think he plays better with Jimmy G under center, to be honest with you guys, not Trey Lance. But regardless, whoever's playing, they're still finding a way to target Deebo here. So those are the guys I will highlight for you guys outside of the core plays here. Now, again, build your lineups, be smart, make sure you play the right guys, of course, but don't just take what I've told you. You know, I've tried to give you some information to help you make your own decisions here, but do your homework, sign up for Daily Fantasy Nerd, all that good stuff. Bonus material, talked about it a little bit already. Daily Fantasy Nerd, just make sure you click it in the description. It does help the channel. If you end up subscribing to them, you know, on a monthly basis, whatever it is, it does help, you know, chip a little bit back to this channel that basically makes no money, right? But in general, you can sign up for free. You can check it out. You can actually play around with it without even signing up for anything. But nonetheless, Daily Fantasy Nerd, the optimizer I use, it's impossible to set 150 lineups without it. So make sure you check that out. And that really wraps it up. Again, happy Halloween to everybody here. We're talking about a week 8 on Halloween football slate. So whatever you're doing this weekend, make sure you have some fun there. If you're playing DFS, hopefully this video helps you out. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Give these videos a thumbs up. Leave me some comments down below if I've missed anything. If you have any valuable insight or any plays that you think should be in a core play this week, I'd love to hear from you guys. But nonetheless, happy Halloween. Good luck tomorrow, and I will catch you in the next video.